This video was sponsored by World Anvil. As the OGL drama unfolded, there was a huge spike in D&D 5th edition players moving over to Pathfinder. For some, this was a way to provably demonstrate to Wizards of the Coast that they had lost these players' business, but for other players, the OGL stuff was just the last straw, and they wanted to move on from 5th edition overall. And some Pathfinder players were undoubtedly overjoyed, because more Pathfinder players means you can play Pathfinder with more people. Others were probably vindicated, because they themselves had made the switch already, and it's gratifying to see other people catch on to what you'd already figured out and come over to your side of the argument. But a few, I suspect, I haven't seen too much of it, but if it were me, this is probably how I would feel. I imagine some Pathfinder players were frustrated, especially if I had been spending years in online spaces talking about how I thought Pathfinder was just a better system than 5th edition. Then I might feel really frustrated when a bunch of people ignored that advice for years and then all jumped on the bandwagon after some drama. I might ask, what the hell? Is that what it takes to get people to try a new system? The designers of their old system have to threaten to burn the entire RPG economy to the ground for them to finally ditch the dragon game? And if the answer is yes, that's deeply discouraging. So, we have to ask, how do you convince people to play a new system? And to get more specific, why has it been such a challenge for Pathfinder players to recruit 5e players? Obviously, plenty of people also play both systems, but we're mainly talking about the people who don't. And I'm sure some of you just leapt to the comments to write sunk cost fallacy, but first of all, I think that's too simplistic of an argument. There are a lot of far more interesting reasons it's such a challenge, and we're going to talk about some of those in this video. But also, I just don't think it's true. If someone isn't enjoying 5e at all, it doesn't really matter how much money they've spent on it. They'll stop playing. They'll probably stop playing tabletop RPGs altogether. They'll figure, well, this just isn't my thing. Sure, maybe the cost of a new game will scare them off of trying something new, but I really don't believe the cost of 5e books will keep them playing 5e. Maybe I'm naive, but there are a million other hobbies competing for our attention. People don't stick with their most expensive hobbies if they're not enjoying them. So let's set that argument aside for today and get to the more interesting answers. And let's start with the elephant in the room. Players of Pathfinder 2, for a long time, have had a reputation of coming into people's replies on social media or YouTube comments and telling them that Pathfinder is a better game than 5e and that they need to switch. It's such a pervasive perception that the first comment on my YouTube channel that ever mentioned Pathfinder was a preemptive apology from a Pathfinder fan, apologizing in advance for how overzealous other Pathfinder fans could be. And honestly, the folks in my comments have been really cool about not comparing Pathfinder and D&D in that same toxic way the commenter was worried about. It seems like most Pathfinder fans who watch my videos aren't like that at all. In fact, ever since NoNat1's made his video about this sort of fan behavior, I haven't even seen much of this on Twitter either, although I'll admit I'm not a great sample size. But I still want to talk about the act of promoting Pathfinder in YouTube comments and Twitter replies and what have you, because it serves as a perfect example for this question. How do we get people excited about the games we enjoy? Because to be 100% honest, from what I've seen, no matter how rational or patient they behave or how well they articulate their points, this approach of going to someone who plays D&D and enjoys D&D and proselytizing the good news of Pathfinder, or honestly any RPG, almost never works. Now, if you comment about an exception, I'm genuinely happy for you. I'm glad you were able to get someone excited about a game you like. And it's possible you used an approach we'll talk about later in this video. But if you're a Pathfinder fan just trying to encourage people to play the game and people keep saying they aren't interested, you might not understand why no argument seems to change their minds. But if you're on the outside looking in, it's actually pretty obvious. If somebody is enjoying 5th edition, then trying to tell them that it's actually bad, or at the very least not as good as they think, doesn't convince anybody. It doesn't matter how well constructed your examples are, because functionally your entire argument boils down to, your fun is wrong. And listen, I totally understand wanting to promote and profess the love of something you're passionate about, especially an RPG, which works best when more people play it. And I can also especially understand it if you're somebody who switched to Pathfinder after one of Wizards of the Coast's many screw-ups across the lifespan of 5th edition alone. But it's important to know your audience. If somebody is expressing frustration at one specific aspect of D&D, or trying to solicit advice for how to tell a certain story or stat a certain kind of monster, stepping in to tell them that Pathfinder 2 handles all that better doesn't actually give them what they want, because they're playing D&D, and presumably, they're enjoying D&D. And while you might have a hard time imagining that, because from your perspective, Pathfinder 2e is a better designed system, or has more options, or just doesn't try to bleed its audience for money in the same way, whatever the selling points are for you, that doesn't change the fact that a new game system isn't what that person was looking for. Matt Colville made a video a while back sharing an experience he had when he was trying to put together a heist for his D&D game. People reached out and said that he should try Blades in the Dark, pointing out that it was a great system for running heists. So he checked it out, but it just wasn't what he was looking for. And he made a video about how hard it is for us as RPG players to communicate what excites them about a new system. But I'd argue it goes deeper than that. I think you need to know whether or not your audience is even interested in a new system. If I tweet, "Man oh man, I am really frustrated by 5e. My friends have been playing it for too long, so they know all the best builds, they know all the monstrous tricks, and I'm just getting tired of running the same type of game over and over." Well, Pathfinder players, that is your moment. I mean, we should all get off of Twitter. It's so bad for our brains and our souls, but if you're going to be on it and you want to try to convince people to play Pathfinder because you love the game, then that is your moment. But honestly, do you know what would get me much more excited about Pathfinder? Not an unsolicited hard sell. No, honestly, I just want to see people enjoying their day-to-day of playing games, and then maybe find out later what they were playing. Here is the perfect message I wish I could get that would actually make me really excited about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. If you like Critical Role, check out Different Actual Play. They are so funny, but also get really serious and emotional, it makes me cry. Diverse cast, lots of LGBT themes, and some really intense combat. I think they play Pathfinder 2? There are only 35 episodes to catch up with. Now, the actual play landscape is heavily dominated by 5th edition, so for some people, seeing a Pathfinder actual play would be the selling point. But I hope you see what I'm trying to communicate. If you want to get someone excited about Pathfinder 2, but they're not actively looking for a new system, then don't go for the hard sell. Find some other way to get them interested or excited. This tweet would be tailor-made for me. I mean, it literally was. I wrote it to be the perfect pitch. But people have different aspects of the hobby they enjoy. Maybe pitch them on an actual play, or maybe highlight a huge discounted sale on Pathfinder books. There have been a bunch of those recently for obvious reasons, and that's what got me to finally buy a bunch of Pathfinder PDFs. Or just share your homebrew and why you like it, or share some dope-ass art. Honestly, a perfect example of seeing this in action is this real tweet from during the OGL drama, when hundreds of folks were checking out Pathfinder 2 for the first time. Rachel Thalade, apologies for the pronunciation, tweeted, "So I'm skimming through the Pathfinder 2e rulebook and found the Alchemist Bomber class. You're telling me I can just make the dude from Atlantis, but as an RPG character? I'm in." I totally understand being excited about Pathfinder, but the reason Pathfinder fans have so often had a reputation for being overzealous is just because you need to know what your audience is looking for. What is actually going to excite them about a new game system? Are they even looking? And especially if someone says, "Nah, I'm good with 5e," that needs to be okay with you. That is an acceptable answer. Again, this is rarely an issue I've seen outside of a few very online people, but I do empathize with this feeling. I get it. I get being excited about something and not understanding why people aren't interested. There are a few movies I keep talking to my wife and my brother-in-law about that I know they would like, but I am just not able to convince them to watch them. And I don't always practice what I preach, so believe me, I totally get where these Pathfinder fans are coming from. And I especially get it if you switch to Pathfinder after one of the many times that Wizards of the Coast has made a mistake or abused their position of power, even just during the lifetime of 5th edition. Like, say, the thoughtless depiction of the Vistani in Curse of Strahd, or the way the denizens of Chult are othered and tokenized in Tomb of Annihilation, or the fact that Dragon Heist isn't really a heist, or the two major screw-ups in Spelljammer, one of which they apologized for, which was the way racist tropes were added into the Hadozi's lore for no real reason, but they never seemed to acknowledge that they also released a space pirate book with no ship-to-ship combat rules. Then there was the OGL 1.1 drama, and at exactly the same time, literally on the same weekend the OGL news broke, they sent packages to influencers that contained dice trays and DM screens where the design was apparently stolen from small creators on Etsy. And honestly, I'm sure there are a dozen more reasons over the past 9 years why somebody might have jumped ship, and any one of them could be totally valid. And also, hey, Wizards of the Coast didn't spring into existence in 2014. They've been the publishers for D&D for a while. Your receipts might go back much further than that. Now, everyone has their own threshold for what bothers them, especially from large companies. But I've said this before among my friends, but a company like Wizards of the Coast has a distinct advantage. Unfortunately, they don't have to be good. They just have to be good enough. They're like Disney or the Democratic Party. They don't actually have to try that hard to win back your allegiance after they screw up, because they know they're the only way you can get what you want. They'll issue their apologies, but they know they won't really lose your business long term as long as you still want what they have. If you want more Marvel and Star Wars and Pixar movies, you gotta get them from Disney. If you want free healthcare and abortion access and equality for LGBTQ plus people, the Democratic Party knows you aren't going to vote for the other guys. And if you want the official D&D content, Wizards of the Coast counts on the fact that you won't be able to go anywhere else. And it helps that they've got the brand recognition and they've got the visibility. But of course, that's always been a bit of an honor system with Wizards of the Coast, because plenty of people make great content for D&D. Even if it's not 5e compatible, you have old school games that capture a gritty adventure feel and high fantasy games that make you feel like a badass. And once we're playing at our tables, whether you're playing the game that has the brand name sort of doesn't matter. And it takes a lot less money to make something compatible with D&D than it does to make, say, a knockoff Star Wars movie. So for plenty of people, Wizards of the Coast is not the only place to go for D&D. In fact, if you don't like the inevitable power creep that occurs across 5e as Wizards tries to sell more books for players to buy, then you might not even feel like they are a valid place to get your D&D content in the first place. But what if you like the 5e system just fine? You've got the player's handbook and the monster manual, maybe you've got Xanathars and Tachas, you're good. You can supplement the rest of your 5e experience with products from other publishers. Plenty of companies put out excellent subclasses and adventures and campaign settings and maybe even magic items? Could you imagine if a company released a book with more than a dozen magic items in it? What a concept, Wizards! The truth is, there's a lot of 5e you can play without Wizards of the Coast. So even when Wizards does burn people, you can keep playing 5e without giving them any money. So if you switch to Pathfinder because you didn't like Wizards of the Coast, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone who feels that way will also switch. Hell, even if you don't like the way 5e works, there are third-party add-ons that can keep you playing 5th edition with those issues fixed. That's the whole point behind Level Up 5e, and they're certainly not the only ones who have created content designed to patch some issues folks have with the 5e system. There are also some folks who don't play with Wizards of the Coast's published material because they prefer campaign settings from other publishers. And I've heard great things about Pathfinder's setting. I'm keen to offer more feedback on it once I read more about it. But that may not be the best selling point for everybody because some folks just prefer creating their own worlds. But no matter whether you create your own world or you use published settings, today's sponsor, World Anvil, can help you run your game. World Anvil is a website that empowers you to run your games more seamlessly by allowing you to create articles and timelines to keep track of your campaign's information in an intuitive system. And you can even run your game through the website. They support D&D 5e, Pathfinder, and a whole host of other games. Visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK to save 40% off of any annual membership. Thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. Now, it's also worth remembering that for some people, D&D is just a hobby, and maybe a casual hobby. That may seem hard to believe, especially if you're someone like me who is actively trying to make a living by talking about D&D. Patreon link below. But it's true. I'm of the opinion that everyone should at least try to play some other RPGs, just to see what they like. But honestly, my group has a hard enough time getting together to play D&D, a game I know we're all excited about. It can be much harder to get people to commit to something new, and it has very little to do with learning a new game system, although it is worth noting that most game systems are pretty easy to learn. They're often a lot simpler than D&D. But it's really about whether you have the bandwidth to try something new for the, let's say, 4 hours a week. That's being extremely generous, but let's say the 4 hours a week you've been able to set aside for this hobby. It's hard to get people to try new games for the same reason it's hard to get people to see non-franchise movies in theaters. All of our time is a precious resource, and if something is going to take time, or, God forbid, money, then we want a sure thing. This is why it's so hard to convince people to try something new if they're already having a good time. It's only when they stop having fun that suddenly the door swings open and people are ready to try something different. Here's an example of this phenomenon in action in movies. Do you remember in the early 2000s when we had a surge of new awesome spy franchises? The Bourne movies, 24, Mission Impossible, all of them hit their stride in the 2000s. Why did the audiences latch onto these? Because aside from GoldenEye, the Pierce Brosnan James Bond movies weren't very good. They weren't giving audiences what they wanted. So when the audience was dissatisfied with their usual spy franchise, they were more willing to try something new, something that gave them what the old familiar property wasn't giving them. I'd even argue that the Ocean's 11 films are part of this. They're not action or espionage films, but they're stylish and slick and cool, like the Sean Connery and Roger Moore Bond films were at their best. And the success of the Ocean's 11 films opened the door to a wave of cool heist stories like The Italian Job and The Thomas Crown Affair and National Treasure. Very similarly, a lot of people tried new RPG systems in the late 2000s because they didn't like D&D 4th edition. Case in point, Pathfinder. But whenever this happens, there's always a risk that the original franchise will get its act together and reduce the likelihood that people will want to try something new. The wealth of new spy movies and heist movies eventually dried up because, I think at least in part, the Bond movies got better. I mean, Quantum of Solace wasn't well received and Spectre is trash, but Casino Royale and Skyfall bought the franchise enough goodwill to survive those films. Similarly, D&D 5e has had plenty of dud releases, but they've also had some great ones that have maintained goodwill toward the edition. In our spy movie analogy, Mission Impossible survived because the third movie was good and the fourth movie was better, and they started committing to something that kept them distinct and made them iconic. Specifically, the focus on practical stunts. Mission Impossible is the Pathfinder to D&D's James Bond. They kept the audience happy when the old franchise was bad, and then they found their own identity that kept them feeling unique, and they were able to coexist once the original franchise got their act together. And then during this new era, you get Kingsman, which recaptures the feel of the old-school Bond movies, but with a more modern, meta twist. In a way, that's like our old-school Renaissance movement. In this analogy, the bombastic, effortless action of the Kingsman films is, I guess, dungeon crawl classics? Except DCC technically launched during 4th edition, but found a huge audience during 5e, so for our example, does that make it the Fast and the Furious? Look, it's not a perfect simile, but I hope you get my point. If you feel like you are struggling to get people to try something new, you're not alone. Every industry has some version of this same challenge, and some people waste millions of dollars on advertising to try to get people to try something new, and then, regardless of how good the product is, they fail. So you shouldn't be so hard on yourself for not managing to do it on social media. You're fighting an uphill battle by default. People don't want to risk trying something new if they feel like they don't need it, because they're happy with what they've got. And all of this can make it really frustrating, I'm sure, to get people to swing over to Pathfinder. And I know that if you're playing Pathfinder and you want other people to do the same, you only want the best for them. But one of the reasons it's so hard to promote other games to people is that if your approach is to try to make people understand that the game they're currently enjoying is actually bad, or at the very least, inferior, then without realizing it, you're effectively insulting their taste. And yeah, for a long time there were plenty of people who claimed 5e is for babies or whatever, even as a joke. But the spirit behind that joke is that somebody has to be stupid to like 5e. So unfortunately, when you make the hard sell to convince people to try Pathfinder, you're automatically being lumped in with those same people, through no fault of your own. So what's the solution? I genuinely don't know. I obviously don't want Wizards of the Coast to keep trying to annihilate the gaming community, and that should not be the only way people get inspired to check out something like Pathfinder. But this isn't really a video about the solution. This is just the perspective of someone trying to show where the root of the problem actually is. Part of it is brand recognition and visibility, certainly. After all, the fact that there isn't a huge Pathfinder actual play show with the same visibility as the biggest 5e shows works against it in a pretty unfair way. I mean, they played Pathfinder on Harmon Quest, and everyone still called it a D&D show. That's a huge bummer. Also, part of it is that someone who isn't shopping for a new system just isn't going to give you the time of day if you try to push one. And part of it is that it's just hard to know what's going to make someone excited about a new system. And I know it's a bummer to watch people ignore a game that you really enjoy. And I'm sorry that happens. It sucks. Now, thanks to the events of this January, our community overall is trying to figure out how to get people to play new games. And it seems like the most successful method we've found thus far is just to tell your group, this is the game we're playing next. But what about online spaces? Well, again, I think the best opportunity is for you to look for an opening where you see one, but actually do read the room. See if they are interested in something that might give you the chance to introduce a new system that you love. And more than anything else, be respectful. If somebody gives you the brush off, don't take it personally. If somebody says they don't like Pathfinder 2 for whatever reason, don't take it personally. I completely empathize with the Pathfinder fans who feel jaded after their online interactions when all they're trying to do is recommend the game, especially if they feel it's genuinely superior to Pathfinder's biggest competitor. And watching a bunch of people flock to the game only after the Wizards of the Coast leadership took off their mask and ran it through a shredder so that we could all see who they were and what they wanted to do, well, I can understand why that could be frustrating to see that be the final breaking point. And hopefully this video has explained why it takes an event like that to crack through the walls that keep people from trying something new. But there is a key difference between promoting a game you enjoy because you hope others will also like it, and insisting that someone's fun is wrong because the game they like is obviously bad. And the best chance anyone has of getting someone to try something new is to consider exactly where that line is, and do their best to be good ambassadors for the game they enjoy. Also, for real, we should all just get off of Twitter, which is what this video was always about. Thank you so much for watching. I actually wrote the first draft of the script back in January, but it just did not feel like the right time to talk about this subject. I didn't want to make it seem like I was suggesting that folks shouldn't try Pathfinder. I think they should, if they're interested. I've got all the virtual books now, and I'm hoping to get some physical copies soon, because I honestly think that's going to make it much more likely that I'm going to read them. All evidence to the contrary. But I do hope soon to play my very first game of Pathfinder. And when that does happen, I will certainly let you know how it went. A quick announcement, I do have a live stream coming up for my birthday. I turn 35 on April 11th, so to celebrate, if we can get to 35,000 subscribers by the end of April, I'm going to give away another 35 sets of dice. And like I said, I'm going to go live around my birthday. The exact time and date will be Sunday, April 9th at 9 a.m. Pacific. Sorry, I'm trying to pre-record these videos, but I haven't actually scheduled this live stream at the time of recording. I'll edit it in later. If you want to support the channel, there are a few ways you can do that. You can subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about new videos as soon as they come out. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday, and watching them early on helps the channel a lot. You can support me financially by joining my Patreon. Even if you support me at $1 a month, that still helps a lot. But also, you get cool stuff at higher levels, if you're interested. If you can't support me financially right now, I totally get it. You can still join my Discord community and be a part of an awesome group of people who talk about tabletop RPGs and share insights whenever they can. And the fourth way you can support the channel is by signing up for my newsletter, where I will keep you posted on other stuff I've got going on. All those links are in the doobly-doo below. In these discussions of which game we're playing, the question also comes in of where you should get the adventures you plan to run. Should you run published modules and campaigns, or make up your own? Check out this video I made on the subject. I think it really helps answer that question. Until next time, play fair, and have fun.